What's up, friends? It is potting up day out in the greenhouse, so I'm gonna grab my coffee and head out there and take you guys along for the journey, show you guys kind of the tips and tricks and what I do when potting up hundreds and hundreds of starts, answer some questions that I've been getting asked a lot recently. So let's go. Ooh, pop this bad boy open. So it is about 9 o'clock in the morning and it is already 78 degrees in here. So I went ahead, propped the door open. This is the first time I'm actually coming out here this morning. I'm gonna go ahead and turn the heater and the heat mats off. I started this process yesterday. So I started potting up yesterday, however, I didn't even make a dent in what I needed to get done. And it was really, really bright, like way too bright to kind of take you guys along. So I thought, well, let me get out here a bit earlier today and just take you guys along with me. Alright, maybe now I won't get a sunburn. It gets really, really bright and hot in here. And there's been several times I've come out here and worked all day and ended up getting a sunburn just because this plastic like penetrates that sun. And I end up like just getting burnt. So try to prevent that today. So I'll show you guys what I did yesterday and kind of what my plan is for today. So this was as far as I got yesterday. I did not get very many done. I did go ahead and up pot these. The thing is too is the time I had to do this yesterday was during the day, and so it was really, really hot. I prefer to do this kind of earlier in the morning or later in the evening, not in just you know, the middle of the day when it's super hot. And the reason that I say that is, you know, you just want to make sure that you're watering diligently. You obviously don't want them to die because they were transplanted in the hardest part of the day. So I kept several pitchers of water out here and made sure I watered them sufficiently. However, it would probably be an easier transition if it wasn't over, you know, it was like 95 degrees in the greenhouse yesterday. I'm out here up potting them. Obviously, that's probably not ideal. They survived just fine. So that is something I will say. Seedlings are resilient. You'd be surprised what you can put them through and they just bounce back. However, if you are able to up pot when it is not the hottest part of the day, I would obviously recommend you guys do that, just because I think your plants will be very appreciative of that. So I got some done here. Oh, I got a sunflower. Oh, I got lots of sunflowers popping up. Right now, the biggest thing has been trying to rearrange everything on these tables. Right now I have them all long ways. As you guys can see, I'm gonna need more space, so I can actually fit 3 if I put them sideways. So I'm just having to go through and kind of rearrange some stuff. But you guys can see here, they're all ready. I usually wait until they get their true leaves, which is what this is right here, before I start up potting them. These guys desperately need that. They also desperately just need some fertilizer, so that's why I'm up potting them. Then when I water them tonight, I'll put my fish emulsion in here. Alright, so before I dive into showing you guys what exactly the process of up potting looks like for me, I'm going to tell you guys what I think about and what I do on the front end, and that would be figuring out a system. Now, you guys know all of the things that I'm up potting are things that I am selling at the plant sale. So therefore, I have to think about my time, what is my time worth, and stuff like that. So if I was just willy-nilly in here, you know, didn't really have a good system, it's probably going to take me a lot of time. So that is something that I try to put in place before I ever begin up potting, because I know I need to get this done fast. I need to get this done efficiently. I need to make sure that I'm not losing my rear on my time investment for what I'm actually going to get out of the plant. And I would encourage you guys to think about that too. Now, if you're just a home gardener and you're just potting up at your leisure, no big deal, right? Like, just go at your own pace. But I want to try to figure out a system on the front end of it to make sure I can just get it done fast and efficiently. Another thing I've done in years past that has completely just like ruined me, especially last year when we did the online plant sale, is I succession sowed multiple things. So I would have, say, German Johnson red tomato, and I had sowed that at 3 different times. Well, instead of sowing that and keeping it with the German Johnsons, it was somewhere randomly in the greenhouse. So when it came time for me to count my inventory and add it online for the plant sale, it was a nightmare. I was like going through, trying to rummage through, like nothing had a system or an order. I didn't keep the same varieties with each other. And I would just really encourage you guys, if maybe it's too late this year, but you're looking into a plant sale for next year, be mindful of that. Keep all your varieties together, especially when you're up potting them. That way when you're transporting them to your sale or maybe a farmer's market, or even if someone comes out to your farm to shop your starts, you have a system. You're like, oh, okay, here's all my reds, here's all my yellows, here's all my pinks. It just really does make a huge difference figuring out a system. Take it from me, someone who winged this without a system. Nathan came in and he was like, you got to figure this out. Like, you're just killing yourself with like your time, and time you're wasting that you could have just avoided on the front end. So I would encourage you guys, be mindful of those things. So one of the first things that I do is I figure out the variety that I'm going to up pot. So for instance, we have the San Marzano paste tomato. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to figure out how many of these I'm up potting. So you see some of these have 2 in there. What I'm going to do is simply go through and count. So I have got 52 in this tray right here that I'm going to be up potting. So then what I do is I come over here where I have my plant markers, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to count out 52 of these. Alright, now that I've counted out the number of plant markers I need, I'm simply going to take my Sharpie and I'm going to write on one of these San Marzano paste. Alright, you guys can see what I've got going on there. Now I'm going to take this and set this in a corner. And I could sit here and write out all 52 markers, but you can imagine this is going to take me a minute to do. So I'm going to do one and stick it in the tray and set these aside. And what I'm going to do is tonight when I go in and maybe I am, you know, watching a show with Nathan tonight or whatever, I'm going to go through and write the rest of these tags and come in the morning and stick them in the tray. So I know that this whole tray is going to be full of San Marzanos. And say I have multiple trays, I'll do one marker and stick in there. However, I am going to need individual tags to be able to sell them. And so I know that if I were to sit here and write out all of the tags when I really need to just be worrying about up potting my stuff, I'm probably going to spend, you know, honestly, probably a couple hours just writing hundreds and hundreds of plant markers. So what I do is I write one, put it in the tray, that way I know what that tray is, keep the rest of them aside in a corner for each variety, and I'm going to take that in. And you guys, I do this like if I am going somewhere and Nathan's driving, I'll take these with me and start writing them out. At night when I have downtime, in the morning when the kids are getting ready, whatever that looks like, I just do this in my spare time because I've noticed that this takes up a lot of my working time, just writing all these out. So I'm gonna just tell you guys, figure out a system that works best for you guys. I'm telling you my system. This is what works best for me. I've tweaked this several times. You guys are really gonna have to identify and figure out what works best for you all. But for me, I just know I was spending a lot of time writing on plant markers, and when I can just throw this into my day-to-day when I'm not out here doing hands-on work, things go by much faster and efficiently for me. So that's what I'm doing. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to count out 50 of my pots. I got them all in the other day. Here they are. I may actually have to buy some more. I've got some left over from last year. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to count 53 is what I think I said. I'm going to go through and count 53 and go ahead and stick them in here. Let's get started. So I will mention each tray will hold 18 of these 3.5 inch pots. So I'm just gonna fill as many of these as I need, set them aside. Alright, so that was pretty perfect. I ended up getting 3 full trays of these, and that ended up being the number that I needed. Now what I'm going to do is simply start filling these up with soil, and this is something that goes pretty fast. This is where you can kind of make up a lot of time, for me anyways. But I go ahead and figure out how many I need, get the trays filled, and then I just bring them over to my soil and start filling them up. So another thing that I think is worth mentioning, I am using, let me grab some. So I am using the same seed starting mix when I started all of these. It's called the SunGrow Professional Growing Mix. If you're semi-local to me, I buy it at Free Aldehoven in Conway, Arkansas. I have been getting asked that a lot. I actually really like this, and I bought an abundance of it. So I wasn't going to go and buy a potting mix to up pot these in when I already had spent a good deal of money on this soil. And I like it well enough. And I'm planning on, when I up pot, I fertilize my stuff anyway. So it's going to be adding that stuff in there. However, say you started with a seed starting mix that didn't have any fertilizer in it, and you were going to up pot and you didn't want to have to add fertilizer, buy a potting mix that has that added fertilizer in the soil itself. Now, I just explained to you guys why I'm not doing that. If you're noticing, you know, even with like a fertilizer, that your plants are still showing some deficiency, still lack of nutrients, then I would take note of that and maybe next year be like, hey, when I up pot them, I really need to buy a potting mix that has that added fertilizer, has those added nutrients. So those are things you just need to take into consideration. I did have some deficiency in my starts, however, they've been in those containers for a while. So I personally feel like by adding in the fish emulsion fertilizer with the soil I already have, I think it will be good enough. I also have talked to another farmer who recommended this. She also up potted into this and just added the nutrients and said it was fine. So this is just going to be one of those things that I am testing and seeing. But traditionally for me, I do not pot up into a potting mix. I still pot up into a seed starting mix. And I know that is super controversial. I know a ton of people would disagree with me, rightfully so. Just figure out what works best for you. For me, however, I've not had a lot of issues doing that, and I'm usually buying my seed starting mix in a larger quantity. Also, I really like the fact too that the seed starting mix does not have big chunks in it. It's much looser, which I really appreciate, and which is a huge reason why I choose to still use that when I up pot. Again, figure out what's gonna work best for you. It's not the same, and I think that's the good thing, is like there's so much liberty to play around with that. What may work this year may not work next year. Tweak it and change it. Don't be so like set on one thing. I may decide next year, oh, this was a bad idea, I need to buy a potting mix. You know, like there's always that liberty to just change your mind. And you know, if your plants are showing that they need something extra, add something extra. You don't have to be married to this idea that if you do it one way one time, you have to do it that way every single time, because that's just not the case. That's one of the really fun things about gardening, is that it's an experience, right? Like you're experimenting with different things. You're experimenting with how you grow, how you transplant, what you grow, how it does in your area. And it's just this really fun journey. So I would encourage you guys, be reminded of the journey, be reminded of, you know, what you can learn from this, and just don't get discouraged if maybe something flops. Just try again. All right, but now let's start filling these pots. So that tray's done. I'm gonna go grab the marker, stick it in. It's actually kind of perfect out here right now. The sun's really not like peaked yet. It's really just like super ideal. Look at this, you guys. My sweet Charlie planted these sunflowers, and they're all starting to pop up. She's gonna be so excited when she gets home from school today. Alright, so for up potting, typically the only tool I'm using is my WIDGER here. I actually got a pack of these off of Bootstrap Farmer, but you can buy them on Amazon. I'll find some links for you guys. I would say this is important. If you don't have one of these and you don't want to buy one, you could use like a butter knife or something just to be able to get into that cell and pop it up. You don't want to take your fingers and start digging around and disturbing the root systems in there or anything. This just kind of fits down in there perfectly. You can just scoop them up, and I'll show you guys that in just a second. So now I've got my tray. I'm just gonna have this set up in front of me here. Make sure I've got all my soil leveled in here. All right, so you guys can see I've got my tomatoes. What I'm gonna do is take this end of the WIDGER, scoop it down, and then lift up. I'm gonna attempt to do this one-handed. Let's see how well I can do. There we go, and then look. Now you've got your little tomato baby. You see all those roots in there? I'm sure you guys have seen people who are just really like delicate with their plants. Like obviously they don't want anything to happen to them. I'm gonna tell you that like, you obviously don't want to like destroy the root systems on here, right? So, but I'm gonna mention this time and time again because it's just so true. These little seedlings are powerhouses, right? I mean, you can put them through some extreme conditions and they're just gonna bounce back. They're gonna be fine. So for me personally, I tend to go a bit faster. I tend to be a bit rougher with mine, and that's okay. You can, you know, figure out what works best for you guys. But essentially what I'm gonna do is take my 2 fingers and I'm gonna create a hole pretty deep down in my pot. Now with tomatoes, I plant them very deep. I do this when I'm up potting. I also do this whenever I'm planting and transplanting them out into the garden. And when I say really deep, I'm going to plant this tomato up to right here in my pot. When this gets big and established and I go to plant it in the ground, I'm also going to plant it really close to those leaves. The thing with tomatoes, the really cool thing about tomatoes is you can plant deep like that and it's just gonna shove all that energy down into the root system, making this root system really strong and established. Also, don't want leggy plants. If you do have leggy plants, this is a really good way to try to fix that when you're up potting it. Just plant it deep, get it good and established. I actually also plant my peppers kind of deep. Not that deep, but I do plant them kind of deep. You don't have to, but for me, I found that they tend to be a lot stronger when I do that. So you guys can see here, I've planted it. The soil is at the very top line here. Now I don't have this pot filled all the way up with soil because it's really not necessary. And then I'm gonna make sure I water it in really well. This is really important. I see a lot of people pop out 10 or so seedlings, lay them out, and then start coming in and filling their trays. I do not like doing that. And the reason being is right now here in Arkansas, you know, it's getting hotter. Spring is coming. It's 80 degrees in my greenhouse already. When I was up potting yesterday, it was like in the mid 90s. So if I were to take all of my seedlings out of the tray that they're in and just have them lay out, they're gonna dry out much faster. So I leave them in the container that they're in, and then I'll just put one. That is how I prefer to do it. Just based off of how hot it is in here. You know, I don't want them to just get droopy. I do also keep a pitcher of water out here with me, and I will either, depending on how hot it is, so yesterday it was really hot, I would make my indention in my hole in here and pour some water in and then up pot my tomato. Today it's, you know, I'm getting ahead of the game a bit. It's not as hot to where I will probably go ahead, do this tray, then come back through and water it really well and move it to the other table. So those are just some things to be mindful of depending on the time. You guys can see here we do have some root systems, not a huge established root system. So for me, potting up, I want to do this sooner rather than later, just so that, you know, in 5 weeks is our plant sale. I want these people to be able to pop the tomato plant out of here and this whole thing just be good established root systems. They can go and stick it in their garden. Now, something I've been getting asked lately is, why do you start these in a smaller cell and up pot them? Why would you not just start your tomato in this particular pot? I think that's a really good question, and it's going to be different for everyone. For me, I have found that when I just start them in the bigger container, so these containers are the 3.5 inch, but they're the deep square, so these are big. I have found that when I just start the tomatoes directly in the big containers like this, they get leggy really quickly, and it's hard to recover that for me. I have found that when I just start them in these smaller containers and then up pot them if they are leggy, which typically mine always get that way, I'm able to kind of fix that problem whenever I up pot them. However, if you don't have that problem, you could absolutely start these in bigger pots. It's just honestly something I've always done, and I'm using less soil on the front end, starting them in those 128 cell pots and then up potting them when I need to. Now, when I grew in the tunnels out at Rabbit Ridge, I started my tomatoes in 128 cell pots, and I took them directly from that 128 cell and planted them in the ground. I just left them in that container for that long, and that worked well for me too. So I do know some people that do that. I think that's just going to depend on kind of what you're trying to achieve. I certainly don't think that there's anything wrong with starting them in the bigger pots, and you are just kind of eliminating an extra step. So very valid question, totally understand it. I'm trying to find two here. I'm going to separate them out, show you guys what I do. I know it's kind of getting sunny out here, so bear with me. All right, so in this cell, I had 2 tomato plants. Now, a lot of times if you're sowing 2 and 2 germinate, this isn't a problem, but right now both of these seedlings are fighting for the nutrients that was in that small cell. So it is good to go ahead and separate those out sooner rather than later, you know, because they are just going to be continuing to fight for nutrients. What I do, pretty easy, pretty simple. I'm just taking these seedlings, gently tugging and separating. You guys can see root stayed with this one and root stayed with this one, and we'll just plant those bad boys. All the ones that I transplanted yesterday have done really, really well. I don't have, like, some of them yesterday were looking super droopy, like just because the time of day. I'm not really concerned with that at all. I watered them really well. They've all popped up really well and look really good. So I'm pretty pleased. I am going to start moving a fan in here though. I keep the door open and the automatic vent, so they do get wind in here, but just to keep that airflow going and just making sure that they are really good and strong established starts, I will probably start bringing in a fan just for some extra, you know, airflow. And if that's something too, is maybe you have a greenhouse that you're needing to do that, maybe you don't have a door that you can prop open and get some of that wind coming through. That is really crucial when you start up potting, and as they start growing, you want the stems of those plants to be really, really sturdy. You don't want to move them outside and they break. So it is really good to start mimicking the elements while they're still in a greenhouse, or even if you're in a grow rack or something like that, you know, and you've got a grow light set up in your house. Add a little fan, just some movement. I start on the lowest setting and then gradually add up. And then pretty soon, I'll just start, you know, moving these things in and out, getting them, you know, used to the weather. I can tell too, though, these starts already are sturdier than the ones I had last year, just from the wind coming in. Also, we've had a lot of crazy wind lately, so the whole greenhouse has been shaking, which has added a lot of movement, which is just actually really good for my starts because it's just getting them conditioned really well to what it's going to be like when they go outside, which is really important. There's nothing more devastating than spending all your time, you know, up potting, growing from seeds, putting them outside, and they just weren't conditioned to the elements well enough, and then they all die and you're just super bummed. I remember one year I had really leggy plants, and it was just not good. I didn't harden off properly, and when I took all my stuff to the sale, I ended up losing over half of them just because it was a really windy day, and they would fall off my table, they would break, they weren't sturdy. The stem of them just was not sturdy, and I ended up having a lot of issues with that. So I would encourage you guys, set yourself up for success and not failure. So here we go. Now I've got my one tray done. I'm gonna water these, move them over there, and then just move on. So I would say that majority of the same rules apply no matter what variety it is that you're up potting. You know, you just want to make sure that you know if you need to plant them deep or not. Some of them, you know, don't require that. You can just up pot them. Also know that you don't have to up pot. You could just start in these containers. I do, like I had mentioned, recommend coming up with some sort of really good system to make this fast and efficient. Maybe don't spend so much time being so delicate, knowing that, oh yeah, they're actually going to be fine. I mean, you guys can see I'm kind of just in here pushing these things in. They'll be just fine. So be mindful of that. All right, you guys, I'm gonna get busy. I've got several hundreds more of these to do. So cheers to hanging out with me in the greenhouse today as I have a potting up party. I'm gonna have the rest of this video be a time lapse and you guys can just enjoy some music and hang out. But thanks, I'll talk to you soon.